Since the dawn of human spirituality, we have gazed upwards with a sense of awe and reverence, seeking to commune with benevolent celestial forces believed to guide and safeguard our existence. Every major faith tradition speaks of the presence of divine intermediaries, radiant, angelic beings and heavenly messengers serving as emissaries between the sacred and the mortal realm. My name is Chris Matheson, and I'm a neo-alchemist and metaphysical pioneer with over 40 years of transformative experience. My journey has spanned high-level Kabbalistic wisdom, advanced Taoist exercises, energy work, and scientifically verified communication with ascended masters and multidimensional beings. As a polymath, mystic and teacher, I've delved into the realms beyond ordinary perception, unlocking the secret of our universe and beyond. Andrew Radzowitz, the psychic firefighter, will now discuss his personal encounter with the ethereal guardians, that is, angels, inside his New York firehouse during his time as a firefighter. This contact experience marked the start of his journey to becoming a psychic medium.
In the firehouse at night, I'm standing in a chair, I'm relaxed, I'm almost dozing off, like, in a very relaxed state. It's after midnight. It just struck midnight, so it's officially 9/11 now. So it's just after midnight, and 9/11, I believe, is 2018. But I have some photos from this too. So I'm sitting there relaxed, and I could hear a voice in my head saying, "Andrew, look out to the left." And I look, and I see two gray extraterrestrial beings. And they were about 6 to 8 feet tall approximately. They had no feet. They were in the air, and it looked like they were almost gliding, like they weren't walking, they almost just glided. They're sitting there looking right at me. They communicated to me, though. They said that they were what we refer to as angels of the Old Testament. That's what they communicated to me. Now, how can I prove that to you? I can't prove that to you, right? Because they're not here with me. But it was a very peaceful experience. They expressed to me that they are always here. They were always in the firehouse. So I said, wow, they're the angels of the firehouse. And they said they're always here. They're watching out for us. All at the same time, I was seeing these beings around, and I just felt totally connected, totally unison, totally in one, totally at peace. They told me that they're always here. They'll always protect the firehouse. But they said they are for people that have the eyes to see them.
The divine realm is associated with the soul, consciousness, and connection to a higher power. It's often described as a source of meaning, divine connection, purpose, protection, guidance, and even a stage for spiritual development. This realm is a concept found in various religious and spiritual traditions, particularly in Abrahamic faiths such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It refers to a dimension or plane of existence believed to be inhabited by spiritual beings. These beings are seen as messengers or intermediaries between the divine and humanity.
I not only believe there's a divine and angelic realm, I've actually experienced it, and it's the reason I do what I do. For me, the divine angelic realm is something that is closer to me than my own breath, and it's the place where I get a sense of who I am and what my purpose is. So it is the thing that allows me to feel ultimately connected to life, the universe, and everything.
Okay, let's talk about the angelic realm, which is right up the very top of the human ladder. In the angelic realm, they are able to access 90 to 100% of their potential conscious awareness. So this is basically what we could refer to as the God realm. The angelic kingdom are very much teachers and watchers and caretakers. People tend to have created God and the angels in their own image. So we have the blonde, blue-eyed angels. Not to say that there aren't some like that, but in actual fact, what the angelic kingdom tends to do, they tend to link into our consciousness and show themselves in the way that we expect an angel to look. From my experience, speaking from the perspective of the ETs, I see the mantids as angelic beings. the peace and the love that comes out of them when you're in their presence is just absolutely mind-blowing. Even my own teacher, Maris, I know he's up there fairly high too, because just being in his presence, it's like as if it's very, very difficult to put into words the level of the love and connection that you feel with these beings. It's like you're in a warm glow and you can feel their aura wrapping around you. It's just amazing.
I regularly make contact with what's considered to be the angelic realm, the Yetziratic realm. Enochian magic is my favourite thing to use. It's a series of 30 ethers. So these are 30 levels of consciousness that John Dee wrote about and was transmitted to him from the archangels. And you use a series of calls to be able to access these angels, and then you can have communication and get information from them. And it also seems every time you do it, it seems to change you a little bit. And the way it works is that you start on the 30th call, but you can only get so far. So depending on where you are in your understanding, your gnosis of what's happening, you will only go so far. So you'll have no contact once you get to a realm, say 27, 26, 10, whatever it is. There's a stopping point and they won't have any communication with you until you've had some certain experiences or some certain knowledge or wisdom that can help you get there. So it's a really good way of knowing how you're progressing in the great work.
The great work, known in Latin as the magnum opus, represents the ultimate spiritual transformation sought by metaphysical practitioners throughout history. At its core, the great work is the process of purifying and perfecting both matter and spirit, transforming the base metal of ordinary consciousness into the philosophical gold of enlightenment. This sacred work unfolds through distinct stages: the blackening or dissolution of the ego, the whitening or purification of the soul, the yellowing or the understanding through the soul's suffering, and finally the reddening, the integration and rebirth of the awakened self. The great work represents the seeker's journey towards self-realization, spiritual enlightenment, and the integration of opposing forces within the psyche.
I 100% believe in the divine angelic realm. Why? Because I know for sure that I've had angelic intervention in my personal life. I've had it at work. I have seen angels in the firehouse. I have seen angels in the funeral home. I have seen angels at funeral services, literally in the back, behind a coffin. I've had families come in for a wake or private sitting, and I have seen what looks like an angelic type being. But most importantly, one night when I was a firefighter, we responded to a drug overdose. We showed up there, we're doing CPR on somebody, we're pumping, trying to get them back to life. I look out of the corner of my eye, and once again, I could see two what looked like purple type beings. They kind of look like these small purple energies in the corners. And I felt very, very holy, very peaceful, very angelic, whatever that means. I look out of the corner of my eyes and I could see them, and they dropped down. They started to drop down, and they were watching literally what we were doing. One of them dropped down, went into me, okay? I've had purple energies come down in my life, come into me and assist me. We're working, we're reviving this person, and the person came back. We got them back to life. So did the angels save them? Did we save them? No, I think in combination. And you want to call it just faith, just belief system, call it whatever you want. All I know is this is what I saw. I've seen this at multiple drug overdoses. I've seen something appear in the corner of my eye, come in, and then join me. Or if my coworker was doing CPR, trying to do rescue breathing, I've seen them merge with them. And then people have come back that are alive today. And that is mind-blowing.
I do believe that within what I call the non-physical realm, there is a divine angelic realm, absolutely. There are all manner of angels and spiritual masters, and you can experience them certainly by, again, raising your frequency and moving into the non-physical realms. And, your intention will set where you end up in the non-physical, because it's all available to you. There's no limit to it. I just think that having an experience with an angelic being of any kind will help you to have faith and to have hope for humanity. Because if these angelic beings are accessible to us through our higher consciousness and through being able to step into the non-physical realms, then that gives us hope that there is something better than what we're struggling through, either personally or as a world. And I just think that's a beautiful thing.
Probably many, many years ago, I believe that we were surrounded by angels, and that infers that there's an angelic realm. But since I embarked into the world of ufology, I tend to think of angelic visitation as more likely to be extraterrestrial contact. And this is something that I've discovered for myself when during the, when was it, late 80s, I think it was, that I undertook a Bible study course on my own volition, plus with the help of various people. And I began to read the scriptures which had descriptions of angelic visitations. And the more I read of those, the more I started to reinterpret them as modern-day close encounters, because that's exactly what they seem like to me.
Plato's theory of forms posits that the physical world we perceive through our senses is merely a reflection or imperfect copy of a higher, non-physical realm of perfect and eternal forms or ideas. According to Plato, these forms are the true reality, existing independently of our physical world, an idealized heaven. In the realm of forms, there exist perfect and unchanging models or archetypes of all things we encounter in the physical world, such as beauty, justice, goodness, and objects. Plato argued that our senses can only perceive the imperfect physical manifestations of the forms, leading to misunderstanding and confusion. True knowledge can only be attained through reason and intellectual contemplation, which allow the soul to perceive the forms directly.
In the convergence of the spiritual and physical realms, our next supernatural encounter of scientist and parapsychologist Dr. Gemma Regan resulted in an out-of-body experience during a car accident, as well as an awe-inspiring intervention of the guardian angel.
Also, obviously, angels are associated with saving humanity or saving people individually. I had an experience, my first out-of-body experience. I was driving along a motorway, speeding in terrible rain in the northeast in a tiny little Mini. Terrible brakes, touched the brakes because everybody was coming to a stop, and the car went into a spin. Now, I was on the far side, so there were 3 lanes that I had to cross, and I knew I was going to die because it was so busy, and I was probably going 80 miles an hour, something ridiculous. And it started to spin, and as you know, time sort of stands still. But I'm not a religious person, but I did see this white being sort of enveloped the car. I could see through the windscreen. I was driving, and my partner was with me, and it just sort of enveloped the car, and there was this sort of stillness, and it just something happened, and we just seemed to glide through the traffic, which is impossible, and stop on the other side, as if I was picked up physically, the car, and moved. It just rested, and it just paused, and then that was it, back to reality. So it was like I'd crossed this threshold.
the divine realm is primarily associated with angels, benevolent beings, often seen as messengers, guides, or guardians. It is a celestial realm believed to house several benevolent beings that embody love, wisdom, and compassion, whilst providing guidance and protection to those seeking help. Across various religious traditions, these beings are revered as powerful guardians and sources of divine intervention. Some contemporary spiritual paths view angels as archetypes, symbolic representations of virtues or aspects of the human psyche. Contact experiences in the divine realm might include a direct encounter with an angelic being, a dream or vision containing guidance or a message, an intuitive communication received through thought or creation, or perhaps even a recurring event, coincidence, or symbol.
I personally have, like I said, I have communicated directly with angels. Yes, there's different archangels that are out there. I have seen angels that there were no words. Like I said, when I was at the firehouse, for some reason, there were these gray entities that had black eyes. People would say, oh, those are grays. That's not what they expressed. But when I was out on first aid doing medical calls, 911, these purplish type beings, these very small entities, not my grandmother, there was no name. They just appeared for some reason. They were drawn, they were expressing, they were gravitating towards people that suffered from addiction, mental illness like that. They would appear and they would help to push people through. But then after that, people would come out of a drug overdose. You'll hear from people saying, wow, I feel like I was saved by something, like an angel stepped in. It did. If you're alive and you're talking and you survive a drug overdose with a needle in your arm or something crazy, there's some sort of intervention. You can call back to that now. You can call it whatever you want, an angel, your grandmother, a lump of purple energy, whatever you want to refer to it as. It's an angel there, you know. Sticking with names, that gets into belief system. So all I know is I do CPR, do 911, bang. A lot of times these things were coming, and I had several encounters like that at work. I also had some coworkers that died on 9/11, okay, in a firehouse. 6 of them died. I was in this firehouse working. And at night, I was upstairs and I had 4 white, 8-foot-tall glowing beings that were there appear. They were angels, these 4 glowing beings. I thought perhaps they were the guys that died on 9/11. They weren't. Those guys did not come through, but there were 4 angelic beings glowing, pulsating at night as in the firehouse too. I got up and I walked through them, and it was misty. It's almost like it was foggy outside. I walked through them, went into the bathroom. I opened the door in the bathroom, and it's like a barbecue was on, like all this steam and like dust. It was weird, but there was nothing in the sky. It just appeared like that. Then I walked back out of the bathroom and walked through them, sat down and looked at them. It was pitch black in the room, but I could see them, these 8-foot-tall beings, and I said, do you see me? I said it out loud, and they turned their heads and looked right at me. So I knew that they understood what was going on. And I thought, wow, maybe they're the souls of the guys that died on 9/11. The next morning, my friend was online posting photos of these beings that he claimed to communicate with. And he had photographed, just about to a T, what I said I was communicating with.
One of the very first things that all that is really drummed into me, into my consciousness, when I first started connecting with them, was that whatever you believe is true is true. Whatever you believe is true. And so absolutely, when I'm working with clients, the energy that shows up to channel through me or to be present, non-physically, with us, is always dictated to by the beliefs of the person that I'm working with or the collective group that I'm working with. So, you know, people who are raised in a religion, Catholics and Christians, Jesus is quite often present. Angels are very much present. People have had star families show up. People have had alien beings that I actually don't believe in show up, so I know it's not my belief that dictates it. I absolutely know that whatever they need and whatever they've called out for has come and is using me to have that conversation with them. I'm simply the vehicle through which they speak the words because, you know, we're human beings. We need someone to say something to us to hear it. And so while the non-physical can try to connect with us in many, many ways, the only way that we can speak is to speak through a human being. And so it is your belief, whatever you believe in, that's what will show up for you from the non-physical. That's just the way it is.
There's an idea that some people have that shamans wear feathers because they relate to angelic presences. It's not something that I've come across. My understanding is that shamans wear feathers because feathers represent spirit. So spirit, and that's why we use feathers for fanning flames with the smoke from the smudge sticks to waft that around people's bodies, and then that energy is cleansed by spirit and by the sage. But also we can have prayer trees where we hang feathers on. We breathe prayers into those feathers and hang them on trees, and as the wind blows, those prayers are taken to Great Spirit to be fulfilled. So feathers, in my understanding of shamanism, represent that connection between humanity and Great Spirit and how very strong and powerful it is. I connect with the world of spirit through something that shamans would refer to as the Great Spirit, meaning it's the energy that permeates everything. In shamanic practice, they have an understanding of animism, meaning that everything in the universe has a soul or has a spirit, which really translates to it has an energy. The Great Spirit, I guess you could say, is like the quantum field, which we would talk about in modern times. It's a worldwide web of energy, and everything exists in it through a particular template, whether it's a tree or a platypus or a human being.
David Alexson's experience presents an intriguing paradox. By her disbelief in extraterrestrial beings, she has repeatedly channeled their energy for clients. Does this contradiction lend credence to the theory that our reality within non-physical realms is shaped by our environment, culture, and belief systems, whether religious or secular? This apparent contradiction invites us to question the nature of our reality and the power of collective consciousness in shaping our experiences of the metaphysical world. Throughout centuries of spiritual traditions and beliefs, archangels have been perceived as celestial bridges, forging profound and mystical connection between the divine realm and humanity's earthly existence. Our next experiencer is the very Reverend Dr. Peter Catt, the current Dean of St. John's Cathedral in Brisbane. He shared with us his calling experience as a young child.
I first really became aware of the realm when I was about 3 or 4, and I was on a beach with my folks. I suddenly had this feeling of being absolutely embraced, loved, accepted, being part of something really bigger than myself. I didn't have the language to describe that until I was in my 20s, when I discovered the Christian faith, and it was discovering Christian faith that actually gave me the language to understand the experiences that I'd been having quite a lot since my childhood, which I just assumed were normal, and I believe they are normal. So that connection for me is really important, in that that gives me a sense of really belonging in the world, being connected to something way bigger than me, which sets me free from the idea that I'm an individual and isolated.
Whilst on Mount Tabor in Israel, Jesus' disciples Peter, James, and John witnessed a divine event. Jesus underwent a supernatural transformation, radiating with the brilliance of the sun and dressed in dazzling white attire, revealing his divine nature. This event also featured the presence of two notable Old Testament figures, Moses and Elijah, symbolizing the connection between the ministries of the Old Testament and Jesus. As a cloud enveloped the mountain, God's voice proclaimed Jesus as his beloved Son, instructing the disciples to listen to him. At around the age of 40, Muhammad had a momentous encounter with the angel Gabriel in the cave of Hira near Mecca. Overwhelmed by the angel's presence, Muhammad was instructed to recite. Muhammad initially expressed his inability to read, but the angel Gabriel persisted, and he eventually recited the opening verses of what would become the Quran, Islam's holy scripture, often known as the first revelation. Overwhelmed by this experience, Muhammad rushed home to his wife Khadija, who recognized his selection as a prophet by God. Hildegard of Bingen visionary experiences began in her youth and were recorded in her writings. These visions, believed to be directly from God, provided insights into the divine, the cosmos, and the spiritual angelic realm. Hildegard explored topics like the connection between the spiritual and material worlds, creation, divine order, and the human-God relationship. In one vision, she received a divine command to share her insights, leading to her prominence in the church and the public eye. Her contributions to mysticism, theology, and music are highly esteemed. John Dee, an English mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, teacher, occultist, and alchemist, served as the court astronomer and advisor to Elizabeth I. Much of his time was dedicated to pursuits such as alchemy, divination, and Hermetic philosophy, and he was renowned as an antiquarian, possessing one of the largest libraries in England. Dee, along with Edward Kelly, developed Enochian magic, a Renaissance magical system. This esoteric tradition originated from documented collaborations between Dee and Kelly, revealing the Enochian language and script through mystical interactions with angels. Central to this practice is the invocation and command of spiritual beings, detailed extensively in Dee's journals, accompanied by the intricate Enochian script and tables of correspondence. Born in North Macedonia, in 1910, Mother Teresa joined the Sisters of Loreto and moved to India in 1929 to teach. While teaching in Calcutta, Mother Teresa had a profound spiritual experience she referred to as a call within a call. During a 1946 train journey to Darjeeling, she felt God calling her to leave the comfort of the convent, where she had lived for years, and start a new mission. She believed God was instructing her to serve the poorest of the poor in Calcutta's slums. This divine calling was a spiritual awakening and a clear summons to a life of selfless service, and her to establish the Missionaries of Charity in 1950. The organization started modestly but grew to provide care for the most vulnerable, including the homeless, lepers, orphans, and those with serious illnesses like tuberculosis and AIDS. Her work gained global recognition, making her an iconic symbol of compassion.
The historic event that resonates most fully for me is actually the conversion of St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis was sitting quietly in the church of San Damiano in Assisi, which is outside the city walls, pretty small little church. At the time it was quite broken down, and Francis was trying to work out what to do with his life. He had a very wealthy lifestyle, but it wasn't fulfilling. While he was sitting in the church for San Damiano, he felt like the crucifix was speaking to him, and the crucifix said to him, "Francis, rebuild my church." At first, he took that to mean fix up St. Beniama, but in the end, he realised it was actually about being a transformative presence. And the reason that experience talks to me is it was a very quiet experience. There were no razzmatazz, and that resonates with my sense of call as well, that it comes out of the quiet, and it's not spectacular, but it's transformative.
I have a spiritual connection with Dr. John Dee. He's the person I'd love to meet because, as I say, he worked with Edward Kelly scrying to make contact with the angels. Now, he's an incredibly intelligent person. He was the original 007, and he worked for Elizabeth I, and he, mathematician, cryptographer, everything. And he wanted to be able to scientifically document what was happening in these angelic realms, what the archangels knew, and what they were willing to transmit to the human race to help improve the human race. So he was really instrumental in recording to the nth detail all these different tables, these Enochian tables, and he had different methods and tools of being able to call in these angels through scrying and talking to the ethers, calling in these ethers through the Enochian language. Now, he used the term Enochian because it was based on Enoch, of course, from the Bible, because Enoch was considered to be in contact with the angels. So that's the whole ethos around it all. But and then it sort of disappeared, and it only resurrected in about the 1910s or whatever. Aleister Crowley, he was the one who wanted, and the Golden Dawn previous to that, who wanted to research into this and use it as a scientific method to be able to contact these higher realms. And it works. So it's well worth trying to do. You need to have a bit of knowledge, and you need to have a lot of experience before you actually get this contact, but it's well worth it, and it's part of the great work.
So, wow, there's a lot of amazing people, but the Maharishi invented transcendental meditation. So I really respect that. I've done a lot of work. I've also studied a lot about ancient Egypt. So a lot of the ancient Egyptian gods, yes, they all have great stories. Once again, any religion that's out there, as long as they have good stories that can apply to real life, I want to hear it all. The Buddha. I went to a Buddhist temple in Brooklyn for 2 years, okay? I kind of did the smorgasbord with spirituality. So is there one in particular? Not one. I like to dabble and try and just take a little bit what works, and then what doesn't work about that person, I don't look into that. And I take all these things and I've created my own system that works for me.
In 2014, an Alexan, modern mystic and direct voice channel of all that is, experienced a profoundly moving encounter that transcended the ordinary bounds of spiritual connection. Within her healing sanctuary, a vivid and transformative presence she identified as Jesus.
It's a lot of fun, but it's also profound. Experiences that you can have with angelic beings and with spiritual masters and, the divine, I guess you would say. And one of those that I've had is, it was very early in my healing work, and I had a client on my healing table. And I closed my eyes, and as I closed my eyes, I started to hear a song. And I found myself rocking side to side in rhythm with this song. And the song was, of course, All You Need Is Love by the Beatles, I think it was. All You Need Is Love. I could hear it in my head like there was a choir of angels singing it. And I was swaying from side to side, and I thought that was really odd because that wouldn't be a normal behaviour for me. And then as I started to work with the client, I started to feel a whole bunch of different energies in the room with me. And as I looked around the table, I could see many what you might call divine beings. Certainly you would call them spiritual masters, and also angelic beings. And I had to laugh. It was funny. Every single one of them was swaying from side to side to the same tune that I was swaying from side to side with. Jesus was there with his hands on my client. There were spiritual masters, many spiritual masters, and some angels as well. And we were all swaying, smiling at each other to this music that we could hear, that perhaps only I could hear. And it was just such a fun experience, but it was also so profound because speaking to my client afterward, she also had a sense of that song. She had heard it as well. She didn't know why, but she came out of our healing session with that song in her mind. And oftentimes music shows up in that way for me when there's angelic or divine presence around me. So that was a fun, but also a very healing experience for myself and my client. Now, people do ask me when I share that story, why was she special enough to get that experience, to have those energy beings around her? And here's the truth. She is not special. She's no more special than you. But she was of the faith that there were these beings, that they existed, that they were real. And so her belief informed her experience and, of course, informed the experience that I had with her as well, which was a beautiful thing for me.
There is a common misconception that spirituality and religion are synonymous concepts, leading people to conflate their views and biases about religion with those concerning spirituality, and vice versa. While all religions do incorporate spiritual elements as part of their faith traditions, it is possible to have a spiritual outlook or practice spirituality without adhering to an organized religion or religious affiliation. Let's define the two concepts up front. Religion refers to a codified system of beliefs, rituals, and traditions that are collectively adhered to by a particular community or group. In contrast, spirituality is more of a personal journey and experience, revolving around the cultivation of inner peace, a sense of meaning, and exploration of one's purpose in life.
With spirituality's personal nature firmly in focus, we now turn to Pastor Brad Smith of the Brisbane Revival Fellowship. He'll share his unique path to faith, recounting the experiences and insights that led him to embrace Christianity and his current role as a spiritual leader.
Yes, I was raised in a family where we believed in God. My grandfather was a minister of religion. My grandmother was a minister of religion. But the reality with all of them, even though we had a very loving relationship, we lived probably the ideal Christian family life with that peace and happiness and a lot of Christian values. I'd never actually had a personal relationship with God, and it wasn't until somewhere around 18 years old, I had a friend of mine invited me to a church meeting where he went. And when I went there, people were obviously different than the church people. I admit they weren't overly emotional. It wasn't exuberant, but it was just an awareness that they had something that I didn't have. And I listened to what was said at the meeting. At one part of the meeting, they actually used the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which are speaking in tongues. There was an interpretation of the tongues, and there was also prophecy, which is simply just an explanation of things that God wants us to know. And I'd never heard that before. In fact, my understanding was that I believed in God. That wasn't a problem to me, but I believed that God had a relationship with the church as opposed to the individual. And yet here I was for the first time faced with people actually having a personal relationship with God, not in an emotional form, not in a sort of educated, I believe this form, but in a literal form. They actually had the power of God in them, and they all had a common experience, and that experience was as Jesus prophesied would occur in their lives. They would receive the Holy Spirit. They would know because they'd speak in this new language which God had given them. Now, this happened to me, and that was a turning point for me, because you can listen to what people believe and you can listen to what they understand, but that's only sort of mental agreement. It's not necessarily experiencing anything.
daily spiritual practice may encompass praying, meditating, attending gatherings of like-minded believers, fasting, silence, solitude, or research into a phenomenon, even participating in group prayer or a pilgrimage.
5 steps to building your spiritual practice. Pick your practice, pray, meditate, exercise, fasting, etc. Create a space to practice. Commit to the practice with affirmations or a written intention. Begin. Reflect and expand your vision.
Prayer is a two-way spiritual connection with God. We converse with Him and also listen. It's akin to seeking guidance or support from a parental figure or a close family member. This privilege of communication with God can be experienced individually or in the company of others, regardless of one's religious affiliation. Christians believe God desires a relationship with everyone and welcomes regular communication. God is ever-present and attentive. However, prayer is not a magical solution for our desires. Rather, it is a means through which God brings love and justice into the world.
When it comes to praying, simply find a safe space, somewhere quiet where you can be comfortable. Kneel, sit, or stand. It's your choice. Once settled, gather your thoughts by assessing your day, week or month, and work out what you would like to express to God. Some suggestions might include thanking God for what He has given you, asking God for help, telling Him that you're sorry, and then asking for forgiveness, or just catching Him up on what's in your heart.
You can speak out loud or telepathically in your mind. You can even sing your words. Once you have finished your conversation, take a few moments to be quiet with your God, and then end your prayer with your religion's version of Amen. This prayer practice may be accompanied by another ritual, for example, lighting a candle for a relative or friend that has passed, or for another deity or divine being.
A lot of people think that prayer is about talking, and we do need to talk. So if we're feeling really upset about something, talking to God is actually a really helpful process. It helps us to process our feelings, helps us to understand what's happening. There is a trap in it, in that sometimes we think it's just a matter of asking for something and for that then to be given to us. So it's like an order request, like going to a restaurant or something like that. You send an order and you get your goods. At its best, it's actually a transformative experience. So we might talk. Often it's just allowing our emotions to be expressed, so that in that process we actually get transformed, and we actually learn something new about ourselves, and we learn something new about what we're called to do. So the whole idea of prayer is that it's transformational. There's the form of prayer where we simply are grateful, and I actually think that's the form of prayer that we need to start off with. And there's a Jewish practice that actually encourages people to offer up to 50 thanksgiving prayers a day, because that actually transforms the way you look at life. So start off being thankful, but also knowing times when you need to be self-reflective and to look at what you've done in your life and your day. And so there are spiritual practices like the Ignatian Examen that allow us to do that at the end of the day. Then there are times when we really just need to be still. That's the role that meditation plays. And so here we encourage people to embrace the full smorgasbord of prayer, using appropriate type and style of prayer for where they're up to. So some people need to speak a lot because there's a lot going on in their heart and their soul, and they need to churn through that to process it. Other people need to be really still and contemplative. And so we work with people to help them develop the full skill set.
We see prayer as, from where I come from, I'm sure many other people do as well. We see, firstly, prayer is just another word for communicating with God. So it's not about asking only. So Our awareness, and my particular awareness of prayer, is that in the first instance I always give thanks. I thank God for I've got my life. I thank God I've got a family. I just give thanks for being alive, being well, being able to cope with the day-to-day life. The other thing I give thanks for is that He's chosen to reveal Himself in our lives, as He does with anyone who asks. And that's been very fruitful for me, just learning to be humble, to thank God, but in turn, just helps you appreciate the fact that you do have a home, that you do have clothes, you do have food, that you are in a place of safety and warmth, that you have a quality about you that you might not normally have had. So I'm thankful for the fact that we have most of human life needs on the table and catered for. In our fellowship, it's quite common for us to have prayer meetings, and we have one on a weekly or fortnightly basis. We get together for about an hour. We have prayer together. We pray in the Spirit, which is tongues. We pray in the understanding, where we put our own things forward. But quite often we have a list of people who we know are going through some sort of difficulty in life, whether it's a health issue or economic or romantic or whatever, just stress of life. We pray on their behalf, and we do this regularly. And I believe that part of the Christian ethic is not to be self-centered. It's rather to be a little bit more aware of other people. Not that you become a doormat to the needs of others, but we certainly are aware that we were called to be assisting each other, and it's a bit like the church, it's a bit like a family.
In our next contact account, Pastor Brad Smith provides a compelling demonstration of the potency of collective prayer, offering insight into this enduring spiritual tradition.
But there's one particular event happened in our life. It was a healing. And one of the men in our church, his boss at his work, we were told initially he had an accident, but what had happened at his house, and this boss was not a church member, wasn't a Christian. His boss had been in an argument with his son, I believe it was, and in the process of the argument, his son threw a pool cue at him, and the pool cue entered actually beneath his skull and came out his eye socket. So this man was rushed off to the hospital with a pool cue through his head. And when we got the prayer request, we had prayer. Now, in the end, I got photos of the pool cue through his head, then I got photos of after they removed it, and the outcome of the prayer for that man and the outcome of the medical report was that when they removed the pool cue, they said the tunnel, which was the wound area, the tunnel was the cleanest tunnel they've ever seen in their life. Not only was the tunnel clean, where it had chipped the bones around the eye socket, no damage was done to the eye. The eye had been displaced by the pool cue, and when the operation was all over, there was perfect vision, perfect alignment with the left and right eye, totally healed. He knew he was healed, and he came and he said to us that if it wasn't for the prayer, he knew that he wouldn't be where he was. And that was just one example. So I think it's always good if you've got a little bit of medical evidence to produce, and even the doctors themselves said what happened. I don't like using the word miracle here because everything's a miracle these days, but they said that what happened was not possible according to what they were able to do.
Traditionally, a pilgrimage was a journey to some sacred place. So whether it was Mecca or Delphi or, I don't know, Angkor Wat, it was always an external location where people would go to either connect with something bigger than themselves, or to have some kind of spiritual awakening, or for penance. These days, a pilgrimage can be something a lot more subtler than that. A pilgrimage could be a journey through walking yourself very gently through a period of grief. It could be taking a conscious walk out in nature. A pilgrimage is really a journey that appears to be an outer journey, but is actually a deep inward journey as well. So oftentimes it's outward steps, but inward towards the soul. So taking a pilgrimage to a sacred land or a sacred place can often open us up in very surprising ways. Oftentimes people set out on these journeys thinking it's all about getting to a particular destination. But actually the journey is the journey. Along the way, particularly if this is a journey you're taking independently, you connect in with your own thoughts, you connect in with your own shadows, and you connect in with the silence. And all of a sudden, there's so much more that occurs on this journey in terms of expansion of your self-awareness, appreciation of the environment that you find yourself in, and more importantly, connection into everything all around you, and that your awareness is forever expanded. You can never ever be the same again.
The Camino de Santiago is a Christian pilgrimage spanning Spain, France, and Portugal, culminating at the shrine of the Apostle St. James the Great in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. Pilgrims have made this journey since the 9th century, believing it to be the resting place of St. James, one of Jesus' apostles. Each year, over 200,000 pilgrims travel its various routes. The most popular route, the French Way, starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, crosses the Pyrenees, and passes through several Spanish cities. Pilgrims often identify themselves by attaching white scallop shells with a red St. John's cross to their clothing or backpacks. The village of Bodh Gaya holds particular importance to Buddhist pilgrims as it is the site that the Buddha achieved enlightenment, known as Bodhi, while meditating in the shade of the sacred Bodhi tree. For over 2 millennia, this location has been a major pilgrimage destination for Buddhists worldwide. The Mahabodhi temple, housing the Bodhi tree and the Buddha's meditation throne, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and welcomes nearly 500,000 visitors annually. The Kumbh Mela, a major Hindu pilgrimage, is renowned as one of the world's largest regular gatherings of pilgrims. It occurs every 3 to 4 years, with pilgrims congregating in one of 4 Indian cities that regularly host the event. The central rite of the Kumbh Mela involves bathing in the city's river, believed by Hindus to purify and cleanse them of past sins, potentially breaking the cycle of rebirth. Alongside the bathing ritual, pilgrims engage in various activities, including spiritual talks, fasting periods followed by feasts, cultural displays, and markets. The Grand Magal of Touba is a biannual 2-day pilgrimage that has been gathering members of the Muride Brotherhood, a Sufi Islamic order, in the Senegalese city of Touba for nearly a century. This event honors the life and teachings of the order's founder, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba Mbacké, and commemorates his exile by French colonial authorities. The Magal of Touba ranks among the world's most popular religious pilgrimages, regularly attracting 3 million or more attendees who come to visit the Muride Brotherhood's most sacred site, the Great Mosque of Touba, which houses Ahmadou Bamba's mausoleum. Shamanic pilgrimages through the Andes Mountains takes the seeker through many sacred sites and introduces them to ancestral medicine ceremony and rituals. Access to the world of spirit being the reward for those that walk this path. Embarking on a shamanic pilgrimage in Peru and traversing the majestic Andes Mountains offers those who seek an inner truth a profound journey through numerous sacred sites. These expeditions not only expose participants to the richness of ancestral medicine ceremonies and rituals, but also grant them access to the world of spirit. This path is one where the rewards extend beyond the physical, providing a transformative experience for those who choose to embrace its mysteries and connect with the spiritual.
The journey to physical sites transforms people, because when you're walking, you actually enter into a form of meditation. Human animal is really unique in that it has this capacity to walk all day. It's one of our evolutionary advantages. It's one of the things that allowed us to hunt animals in Africa. We could keep walking even to things that could outrun us, but eventually we could outwalk them. And so we have this incredible capacity to walk. And when we walk, we enter into a rhythm. We don't have to think about walking. We just fall into a rhythm. And that becomes one of the ways in which our body enables us to pray. And when we enter into that deep rhythmic form of prayer, then we are open to being transformed. So people who go on these long pilgrimages, like the pilgrimage to San Diego or the Via Francigena from Canterbury to Rome, will say that the experience causes them to enter into this deep experience of contemplation. And in that contemplative space, they actually find that they're actually examining their lives, they're being transformed, they're getting answers to the big questions of life. And they get to the end and find that they have been completely transformed. It also reminds us you can't fast track this process. You actually have to go on the journey to get the benefits. So getting on a bus and going to the end doesn't get you the benefits of actually doing the walk. You actually have to spend the time doing it, which is a really challenging message for our culture, which is intense and everything.
There are many different types of shamanism practices in the world, but they have one thing in common, and that is that the shamanic journey is the common denominator. But there are other things that come into play too. And sometimes shamans can go on what we would call a pilgrimage. In South America, they would go on a pilgrimage to their sacred mountains. They're known as the Apu. And these Apu are the highest mountains, and they're around the planet, they're around the world, because they're closest to spirit. They're the highest mountains in the world. And these Apu are great protectors and overseers of their culture. And from there, the spirit of the mountains is very powerful, and it can give us the most profound answers to questions that we may have been searching for decades. Part of that pilgrimage would be to offer up a lot of prayers and offerings to the Apu to assist in that pilgrimage, to help shamans find answers on their quest to inner knowledge and how they can use that to help others.
So going on a pilgrimage doesn't necessarily have to be within the dogma of religion. It can be exploring a sacred site that has been reappropriated. Most sacred sites have been a sacred site for thousands of years, and they've just been reappropriated by the next big thing, so by the Christianity or whatever, or Druids or whatever it might be. So going to these sacred sites is incredible. One of my favourite sacred sites is at Glastonbury. The Glastonbury tour in particular, which has the labyrinthine walk up to it. Now, there's loads of ideas of what it's associated with. It's commonly associated with the Druids, and there's the cathedral next to it, the ruins of the cathedral, Glastonbury. And I have some profound experiences there. You've also got the sacred holy water, so you've got the clear holy water and the red holy water. And those who are religious see it as the blood of Christ. Others see it as iron-rich water, which is what it is. But just by drinking those waters, and I brought some back with me, and I gave it to some people who were sick, it's considered to be healing. So visiting these sacred sites helps you with this the resonance of the frequency. And again, I don't want to get too woo-woo, but you feel like it's a different place. You go to these places and you may not even be aware that they're sacred sites, but you feel like they're different, and you always have these profound experiences. So I remember I've been to Glastonbury many times, but one time there's a special rock that not many people know about on one of the corners, and it resonates. And you go and you touch it, and it has this physical feeling, and it allows you to access other realms. And yes, obviously, if you're aware of that, but when I went, I didn't know anything about it. And I was actually on a little tour, and it was just about sacred sites around the whole area, Stonehenge and those sorts of things. And I touched it, and straight away I was electrified, and I had all these visions of things that had happened there. Of course, there's the sacred tree, and Jesus was believed to have been there, and all sorts of things are associated with this area. So it's been appropriated by many different cultures. And it gives you a connection to whatever that energy is. And so depending on what your paradigm is what you'll experience. But it's a really good thing to do to go there as a sort of a pilgrimage, not necessarily to any dogma, but just to see what happens.
And as a consequence of actually walking this path in a very concentrated way, what makes a pilgrimage is intention. And that intention is usually to connect with something or to heal something that a person is going through. And what happens when you're actually on this journey is that the brain waves shift, because what's called the default mode of the brain, which is that part of the brain that has us be very self-centered and that processes information based on self and ego, starts to take a backseat. And when that happens, all of a sudden, other things start to shift. So the thing is, you're physically moving, you're mentally expanding, and you're spiritually becoming more awakened and aware as well. When that happens, the nervous system in your body is starting to settle down. Your cortisol levels start to settle down. And all of a sudden, your mind is open to awe and wonderment and expansion of your thinking. So you're no longer thinking in very linear ways. All of a sudden, you're starting to make connections, maybe with things that you're seeing, things that you're sensing, things that you're thinking. And this is when, I guess, illumination or awakeness can happen for people, because they start to have self-realization and realization to the connectedness of spaces and realms beyond the physical form.
Now, in 2001, I think it was the 9/11 event in America, the very tragic event with the planes coming in and hitting the Trade Center. Now, what was happening back then, there was a lot of ET help going on at the same time, and Kira was having completely conscious memories of being taken over there. Oris used to come and pick her up every night and take her over there. And I didn't have a lot of conscious recall myself, but she told me that I was there every night with them. And I actually have a very profound memory. One memory that I retained from back then was of walking along the street, through where the wreckage of all the rubble was, and almost stepping on a human trunk. No head, no arms, no legs, just a human trunk. And I remember trying to lift myself up so that, I wouldn't step on it. It was a pretty horrible experience. But what her memory was, and I have a vague memory of this myself, was the Greys and the Angels being there, helping people out. She was taken in by Oris to stay with people who were trapped under the wreckage and so far in that the rescuers couldn't get to them. And she spent time with them, and she noticed that both the Angels and the Greys who were there doing an aura cleanse on these humans who were dying. And this aura cleanse was actually taught to us, and we teach it in our Reiki seminars. And on a couple of occasions when it was their time to die, and she actually saw, on a couple of occasions, angels and greys almost arguing with each other. The grey begging the angel to let the person live. Let me help them, let me help them. And the angel saying, no, it's their time. We have to help them. And what the angels used to do, they would bend down over the person and hold their hands out like that, and take the person's hands in theirs and lift them up out of the body. And Kira saw this on a number of occasions. And as she said, and I've often spoken about this in interviews, it was very, very moving, because many people who lost loved ones in the 9/11 event worried because they knew their loved ones were, trapped under all the wreckage and they couldn't be got to, and so they were alone when they died. Nobody was alone. There was always angels there were always greys there, and sometimes the greys would take the form of angels so as not to scare people. And what the greys used to do would be to try to keep the person alive until the rescuers could reach them. But if they couldn't do that, or if, for example, a person's time to die had come, then the angelic ones would come in and help them up out of the body. So I just like to talk about this to maybe bring a little bit of peace of mind to people, because it doesn't just happen in a situation any situation where things like this happen, when people are trapped in mines and can't be rescued. They never die alone. Nobody ever dies alone.
Pentecostalism is a branch of Protestant charismatic Christianity that places a strong emphasis on direct personal encounters with God through baptism with the Holy Spirit, that is, contact between humanity and the angelic realm's Holy Spirit. Pentecostalism advocates two well-known practices: speaking in tongues and faith healings.
Pentecostal believers, during a spiritual encounter, may express themselves through fluent, incomprehensible sounds or communicate in a language previously unknown to them, commonly known as speaking in tongues. This community believes that this vocal phenomenon can encompass a wide range of languages, including language of celestial origin. Pentecostals emphasize the role of prayer and faith in healing. They refer to scriptures like James 5:13 through to 16 for guidance on healing through prayer, which can be done for oneself or others. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective.
Some people consider faith healing a little bit differently depending on whether you're Eastern or Western culture, but from the church perspective, Jesus built his ministry as he walked around, and quite often he healed the sick. And I guess we could call that faith healing because that's how we see it in the Christian realm. But faith healing is a lot more than just a healing of the body or a condition. We find that Jesus invited some people to be healed, others invited him themselves, others, like the woman who just wanted to touch his robe. She knew she could be healed. She actually invited herself without his knowledge. And amazingly for her, and I guess historically for us to read, she was totally healed. And he was fully aware that something had happened, because I think the Bible term is that he felt righteousness move from him. In other words, he had a blessing from God and he knew the blessing, something had happened. So that sort of revealed a little bit of an understanding about how faith and healing works for spirit people.
When I was in Grafton Cathedral, one of the experiences I remember really well was a guy who had mesothelioma from working in an asbestos-related industry. And he went off to the doctor at one stage and had a scan of his lungs, and they found multiple lesions. And he came to the healing ministry, which he'd been doing regularly, and we anointed him, prayed for him, and several months later he had another scan and the lesions had completely disappeared. Now, that was for him was a really miraculous healing. In the fullness of time, the lesions returned and he actually died of that disease. But he was able to talk about the respite that being freed from those lesions gave him, to allow him to deepen his relationship with his family, to get his estate in order and stuff like that. And so for him, it was a really important gift of healing.
In congregational healing prayer, the sick person demonstrates their faith by summoning the church elders, who pray and anoint them with olive oil, symbolizing the Holy Spirit. Pentecostals also believe in healing through the laying on of hands, inspired by Mark 16, 17, and 18, as it mirrors the way Jesus often healed. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands. And when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people, and they will get well. Most think of faith healing as a purely religious practice. However, it could also be called spiritual healing. No one truly understands how it works. A number of theories have been discussed, namely biological healing energies of a healer reacting with the patient's bioenergy field to activate healing, the latent self-healing power that everyone possesses that is in some way activated by the healer, an altered consciousness due to prayer that triggers change within the body, or perhaps it is the intervention of a spirit, cosmic force, or a higher being that is in fact supplying the healing power.
Yeah, look, probably speaking in tongues is more than likely one of the most misunderstood miracles in the Bible. Firstly, Jesus Christ predicted that people would speak in tongues. He said in Mark 16 it would be a sign that followed true believers, and it was one of a couple of signs he mentioned. Now, he also mentioned the book of Acts, and I'll just quote these things without being too boring. The book of Acts mentions a prophecy which Jesus said, and he said, look, and this is after he'd risen from the dead, and this is before he went back, up unto his terms, before he went back to the Father or back to heaven, whichever way you want to see that perspective. In the 40 days he was on the earth, this is the last prophecy he did at that time. He said the Spirit of God's going to be poured out. He said it's going to start in Jerusalem, which happened on the day of Pentecost, which is Acts 2. Then he said it would go from Jerusalem to Judea, from Judea to Samaria, and from Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth. Now, a lot of people read that not realising it's actually a prophecy. It's not just a statement, because that's precisely, over the next 5 or 6 years, that is a precise order of how the Christian blessing of receiving the Holy Spirit, salvation, was first recorded in the Bible.
I've actually known a few people that have spoken in tongues, and I think one of the key things about it is that it's a gift. It has to be received as a gift. I think the problem comes when tradition says that in order to be a Christian, you have to do this. I've met people who have been legitimate speakers in tongues who just say for them that's part of how they connect to God, and they just, it's like they find themselves on a different plane and that works for them. I've also dealt with a whole bunch of people who were part of a church that said in order to be authentic Christian you have to speak in tongues, who spent years telling themselves, well, actually I'm pretending to speak in tongues because I want to fit in. And one of them tells the story of how he was sitting around with a bunch of mates from that church one night and thought he would take the risk and said, you know, I've never actually spoken in tongues, but I pretend to so that I fit in. And he said, every other person sitting around that table said, me too.
Phenomena of speaking in tongues and faith healing are often perceived as divine gifts bestowed by divine realm beings. But does the manifestation of these abilities automatically designate one as a true believer? This apparent link between supernatural abilities and spiritual authenticity raises broader questions about the nature of faith and the diverse ways in which individuals connect with the divine. Our next contact experience, shared by Pastor Brad Smith, details a very traumatic event, a hit and run.
I lived on a very busy road called Sandgate Road in Clayfield, and we lived opposite the hospital, and we actually lived or rented one of the doctor's residences where the doctor no longer was required. And we lived there and we had to pay the rent. Now, unbeknown to me, my daughter thought she would do us a favour and was going to take the cheque over, because back then it was cheques, take the cheque over to the hospital and pay it for us and come back. It was basically across the road. Now, in front of our house was a pedestrian crossing. So she knew how to stop, look and so on, so she stopped, the car stopped, so she started walking, but unknown to her, there was another car coming down the outside lane, and when he looked, the car was stopped, but because she was smaller than the car bonnet, the person in the car couldn't see her. So he just put his foot down and kept going, not realising there was a little person about to walk in front of him. Now, she actually walked in front of him, and he hit her. He was doing 60 kilometres an hour, according to the car behind, because that car behind had a nurse in it. And I spoke to all these people after the event, and I won't go through all the details, but everything I'm saying was confirmed and without exaggeration. Now, she was hit by the car. She flew through the air. She landed in the gutter a car length down the road. So we sort of worked out that she'd gone through the air somewhere between 20 and 30 feet from where the impact occurred in her body, where she landed on the road. Now, he did a hit and run. He didn't stop. And the nurse behind, she followed the car, got the registration details and came back, and she was standing there. Now, just to add a little bit more interest to the story from my perspective, it was one of the first days. I had my own business, and I was one of the first days in 2 years I hadn't had a sickie, and I was feeling just slightly under the weather with the flu or something similar coming down. So I'd driven home, it was an hour before knock-off time. I'd driven home, and as I parked in the driveway, I saw Laura out the front, and I just assumed she was going next door to a friend's place. And I saw her out the front. I waved. I pulled in the driveway, but then I heard the squeal of the brakes and the yell of obviously distress. And you just had this moment where just darkness comes over and you think she's been hit. Now, I rushed out the driveway, obviously, ran down there. She was lying in the gutter. There was 2 or 3 people around her. And a nurse came along the scene later. Now, Laura was lying in the gutter, and I came down fearing the worst, but when I looked at her, she was sort of in a fetal position. Remember, she's 6 years old. She was a thinner child. It was in the summer months, so she had a pair of shorts on, and she had a very light T-shirt, but at the same time, her grandmother had knitted her a heavy cable cardigan with really thick wool on it, and she had that on because it was sort of a favourite piece of clothing. And she's just lying there, absolutely motionless. And I looked at her, and there was no blood, there was no bones, so it was very clear that whatever happened to her, the injuries hadn't occurred because there was nothing visible. Her posture was normal, even though it was fetal, it was normal. There was nothing twisted, distorted, no blood, nothing else. So it sort of dawned on me that God had actually preserved her more than I thought. Now, I had a quick little prayer. I picked her up. The nurse told me not to move her. She said kids, when they're hit by cars, they always get skull brain damage because of the head hitting the bonnet and this, that, the other. She panicked and ran off and rang the police. Now, I didn't know any of that. I just took her in my house, which we were already just a few metres from. I took her in the house, had a bit of prayer. I took her cardigan off just to check there were no scratches or anything else just to make sure, because I planned to take her to the hospital, which I did do, to let her get a proper check-out. And amazingly to me, when I took her cardigan off the side where the car hit her, she had that impression of the cardigan all the way down the side where the cardigan was, and yet the impression had never gone deeper than, you know, when you lie on a blanket or lie on something, you get skin creases. It hadn't gone any deeper than the skin crease, and that was the only mark on her. Now, interestingly for me, after I realised that God had preserved her life, because what had happened to her was just simply impossible. After what had happened to her, I then looked down and there was one drop of blood, and the drop of blood was just on her ankle, and the blood came from when I picked her up. I grazed her ankle on the gutter. So amazingly, when God cares for someone, he cares for them, but she gets hit by a car, comes out of it without anything but a bit of small shock, and the only real damage she had was from where I picked her up, not damage to picking her up. So that's another memory.
A near-death experience, or NDE, is a profound personal encounter associated with death or impending death, which researchers describe as having similar characteristics. Many NDE reports involve the feeling of leaving one's physical body and observing the world or their own body from a perspective outside of themselves. While some individuals find these experiences comforting and life-affirming, others may interpret them in different, more negative ways. NDEs typically occur during reversible clinical death, and explanations range from scientific to religious. According to neuroscience, NDEs are subjective experiences resulting from disruptive bodily sensory integration during life-threatening events. All metaphysical NDE survivors believe that they lead to an individual gaining profound insights, increased empathy, and a transformed perspective on life and death.
There are a number of NDE elements that have proved themselves to be common, namely a similar setting or environment, an ethereal or surreal atmosphere, a sensation of leaving one's physical body, the perception of moving through a tunnel or encountering a bright light, encountering deceased friends or family members, a movie like Life Review, overwhelming feelings of peace, love, and interconnectedness, and of course, a return to their physical body after their experience.
I've had a few conversations with people who've had near-death experiences, and I think certainly how they report it is that for them it is one of the most transformative things that happens to them. It's realism real, and incredibly profound and beautiful. And so I think for those people, they're actually really significant and important, like any spiritual experience. But a genuine spiritual experience gives you a sense of it being realer than real, and it changes how you live your life from that point on. And everyone who I've spoken to who's had a near-death experience has actually lived their life in a different way.
After I had a near-death experience, it got me to thinking about all sorts of things. I already had an idea of that, it was a good possibility that we could continue to exist after we die. I had a belief in reincarnation, which later on I questioned. But I think what it did was it took me down the paranormal path. And I really wasn't expecting that, at least more deeply. So it got me to thinking other things too, like how does the human mind exist? How do our belief systems drive us? Can we operate without a belief system? Is it true that there is an afterlife? So I think what it did was it drilled down on me personally to actually get to the real truth of what was going on and find answers to those questions. You have to remember that the study of near-death experiences has been occurring since the 70s, and it's been looked into by psychologists and psychiatrists. So it has a very well-founded and grounded and well-documented collection of stories and investigations around it. And because it was 1975, I think, that the International Association of Near-Death Studies was established by those particular types of people, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. So I think it's been better received than other paranormal events, because if you have what you call a paranormal event, you're seen as weird. But if you report meeting God in our Western culture, that's not too bad at all, actually. In fact, it's much more accepted to have met angels and God and these, sages in our non-ordinary states of reality, because that's what Christian churches are based on, and that's at the core of Western culture.
According to neuropsychologist Helena Cassol, PhD, Scientific Coordinator of Neurological Rehabilitation Centre of the University Hospital of Liège in Belgium, 15% of intensive care unit patients and up to 23% of survivors of cardiac arrest report having had a near-death experience. Dr. Cassol shared this information in her speech titled Characterization and Incidence of Near-Death Experiences on the 8th of June, 2023 at a New York Academy of Sciences conference.
My very first near-death experience occurred in 1991. I was 24 years old and I'd had 2 surgeries in very quick succession. It was literally 2 days in a row. And as a consequence of that, I'd lost a lot of blood and I was in intensive care and I was totally unconscious for an extended period of time. And I think it was day 3 or 4 while I was in ICU. I had this first NDE experience where I was aware that an aspect of my awareness had left my physical form, and I was floating up at the ceiling looking down at my physical body. So I had total awareness that here I was, and I had total awareness that there I was on the bed lying down, and I could see the vitals on the equipment go completely flat. And I was watching the nurses running into the room and to revive my physical body. And there was no emotion. There was just this serenity and just pure observation, no judgment at all. But there was that sense of floating at the ceiling, just looking down, knowing that that was me and this was me at the same time. And I was suspended there for several minutes, just observing. And then all of a sudden, this big male voice boomed at me from the left side and said, "It's not your time yet." And with that, I was catapulted back down into my physical form for the next round. And then the next day, the very same experience happened again. Hold on to your seats. My last near-death experience, which was my third, happened in 2023. I was in hospital receiving ketamine treatment for a chronic autonomic nervous system disorder, which had me in physical pain on the right side of my body 24/7. And my blood pressure was super low. I was literally falling down and passing out almost every day. And this treatment had been successful when it had been trialled once before. So I had no hesitation doing it under strict supervision in hospital in 2023. However, we're now talking post-COVID and the hospital protocols were not as effective, I'll say, at the time. And so my vitals and my bloods weren't being checked often enough. As a consequence of the administration of that treatment, my body went into toxic shock. I literally flatlined and died. And I was fully aware that my body was unconscious. Yet, at the same time, what happened was I saw this incredible golden grid rise up and out of my body. And it was something I had never ever seen before. It was like this golden elixir color. It was a color I'd never seen. It was the most like molten lava gold color. And it was in the shape of a rectangle coming up out of the area of my solar plexus and my heart. And it had all these lines on it like a grid. And at the same time, I saw this beautiful white torus field coming down from the top right-hand corner of the hospital room. And I was observing this scene playing out. Now, I knew, I had full awareness that my physical body was unconscious. And then I was fully awake in this other realm watching this scene. And I said, wait, am I dying here? And I said, I haven't said goodbye yet. So I actually didn't have a problem with the fact that this was my soul being called home. I had not had a chance to say goodbye to my significant others. So an aspect of my awareness, in an instant, was able to travel to Melbourne interstate and find my father in the garden and say goodbye to him. I found my mother in the kitchen. I said goodbye to her. I found my brother driving his car. I said goodbye to him. I found my sister at her house. I said goodbye to her. And I found my 2 children on the Gold Coast and I said goodbye to them. And then my awareness came back into the room to this suspended scene and I said, okay, I'm ready now. And then all of a sudden this other voice rose up and said, not so fast. It's not you that decides when to tap out, it's me. And it had my full attention. I'd never heard this voice before. And I was like, who is that, you know? And this voice went on to say, you've used me, you've abused me, you've ignored me, you've exhausted me. And it just gave this full-on rant. And everything that this voice said was absolutely true. And that's when it reiterated. So therefore, it is not you that decides when to tap out, it's me. And I could feel physical tears running down the physical body. And I felt ashamed. I felt like I was on my knees and I was begging mercy and forgiveness. Because what I realized in that moment, that was the voice of my body. And that my body had a voice. Like I'd heard my body, you know, many times say, you need rest, or I don't really want to go out today, or I just want to sleep in. And I would totally ignore it and just push myself beyond exhaustion. And here I was in a hospital bed, literally about to tap out of life. And she gave me this serve and I begged forgiveness. I said, I am so sorry. I didn't realize just how critical and how important this relationship with you really is. And having been raised a Catholic, I'd heard the words, the house of God before, but I never really had an embodied understanding of it. And for the first time in my whole life, I realized what those words actually meant. That source energy, that soul grid that was coming out of my body, that was God. You know, that's Creator, that energy source that gives this physical form life force, yeah? But this physical body that I had taken for granted for so many years, that had been begging and pleading with me for my attention and my love and my care, and I totally ignored it. And now all of a sudden I had the opportunity to hold space with this voice and say, I'm so sorry, please, please, please give me another chance. And thankfully I got another chance, and I now live extremely consciously with full awareness and appreciation for what this physical body actually is. which is enablement of the expression of my life force. And if I don't look after this physical form, I can't achieve what I came here to do.
A spiritual awakening represents a profound shift in consciousness that transcends the limited perspective of the ego-driven self. The ego is our exclusive sense of self, or I. This awakening occurs when, for whatever reason, the ego somehow lets go so that a higher self or spirit can arise within. Those who have gone through a spiritual awakening often cite a major life event or upheaval that kick-started the process. Things like the death of someone close, a serious illness, divorce, a brush with death, a mental health crisis, a midlife reckoning, or an existential crisis that shattered one's former reality and sense of identity. These deeply disruptive experiences seem to create the opening for ego transcendence and an awakening to one's deeper spiritual nature. Here are the more common signs of a spiritual awakening: letting go of unhealthy patterns, embracing all emotions, negative and positive, taking time for self-reflection, living with purpose, exploring our inner world, thoughts, feelings, dreams, and imagination, seeing all sides and perspectives, finding inner peace, taking responsibility and becoming more accountable, living consciously in the world, feeling connected.
Spiritual awakening implies the return of what the Taoists call the original spirit, or what Jung called the self. It's this return of spirit that makes us truly human. In a room charged with hope, modern mystic and direct voice channel of all that is, and Alexson, channels divine energy to assist her son's healing journey.
I had a really profound experience when I was doing some healing work with my son. So he'd been diagnosed with bowel cancer a couple of years before, and so I started doing regular healing sessions with him. And one of the very first sessions I did with him, I invited him into my healing space, lay him on the table, and as we moved into the space for healing and channeling, I just felt this enormous presence literally take up the whole room. And as I tuned into that energy and saw this 8-foot angel, huge wings. I mean, the whole space was filled up. I felt like there was no space left for another person in the room. And I watched as this angelic being layered itself over my son and merged with him. And I was shown in that moment that we all have, every single one of us has a non-physical aspect in the angelic realm that is another part of us that is magical, that's angelic, and that is here present to us when we're open to it, to help us through whatever we're going through, to heal us. And so every single time from that first time that my son walked into my healing room, this being was present in the room with us every single time. And I channeled the energy from that being. Every healing thing that I did with my son, every meditation I shared with him to work with through his chemo or anything at all, it all came from this angelic being. It was never anything that I'd ever spoken or shared with anyone before. It was a unique to him thing that was coming from this angelic realm that he was a part of. We're all a part of it, and I really want to emphasize that.
A Gallup poll taken in May 2023 of 1,011 US adults revealed that belief in God had dropped by 16% since 2001. The poll also showed sharp declines in church attendance, confidence in organized religion, and how people identify as a religious entity.
It's interesting that the belief in God dropping. It's not surprising. The actual Bible prophesies that at the end of the age there'll be two things happening. One is that the belief of the people who God blessed would be in decline. It's already clearly stated in the Bible. In fact, he talks about the great falling away. Now, interestingly, on the other side of the coin, he talks about the great outpouring or the latter rain. So when we look around the world today, the nations which brought the Bible to the world, which is basically the Western world, the Bible societies for America, England, and some of the European countries, they brought the Bible into the world, they brought the knowledge of God into the world, they brought what we would term true Christianity into the world. And there's been great revival. Martin Luther's probably one of the early ones, and we've all got knowledge of other great and famous people who have come and gone. However, as in the Bible, as the history of the Bible, every revival was followed up with a falling away. Every blessing was followed up with corruption. Everything good was always followed up with something evil. And even King Solomon's life was an example. He was a young man, offered the role of being king, and he was very humble. So the first third year of his life, he was really dedicated to the Lord. The second third of his life, God blessed him. He did a lot of things. At that point, he's the wisest man who'd ever lived, expressing abilities and thoughts and actions and decisions for the nation that were just prospered beyond belief. But then came the last third of his life, where he fell into multiple wives, pagan gods and all that. And that just seems to be the pattern of humanity, the pattern of nations, the pattern of everything, that people start off hungry, they have their lunch, they feel good, and after that they abuse the system. And it's not a surprise scripturally that that's happening, but the Bible, as I said earlier, the Bible talks about a great outpouring which is happening. But the interesting thing, and this is just purely an observation, the interesting thing is, if we go to the developing world, or the third world as some people like to call it, there's a great revival in Pentecostalism. People everywhere around the world are receiving the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues. But they're the poor nations of the earth. They've got nothing. They're looking for answers and they want truth. Where in the wealthy nations, the West around the world, where they've got excess time, excess money, excess wealth, excess everything, excess egos, we find that there's actually a moving away from God. And that's typical of pattern of human behaviour. It's also Bible prophecy. So interestingly, it's not surprising. It's actually prophetic, and more than likely we'll see even less people believing in God by the time Jesus Christ returns than what are happening now, and it could be in very large numbers in the West.
My perspective on spirituality and religion totally changed as a consequence of my near-death experiences. Before I'd had the near-death experiences, I'd never heard of a near-death experience. My first one occurred in 1991. And I was only 24 years old, and no one I knew had ever had one, and we certainly never talked about NDEs. It wasn't a topic of conversation generally, and it was something that had never been discussed even in the church, having been raised a Roman Catholic. Spirituality wasn't really part of my consciousness and awareness at that time. I was more religious than spiritual. However, having had the experiences that I had, I started having questions that I needed answered. But this time, I became the seeker. I didn't just blindly accept and believe everything that I'd been taught by people in authority, my teachers, my guides, the priests, my parents. All of a sudden, I had big questions, but I realized I had to be the one who answered those questions. And so in my mind, I had questions around even the religion that I'd been raised in, and I went and spoke to the Archbishop and asked him questions, and he was asking me to, do certain things that I know the God of my heart would never have asked me to do, because the God that I knew was all loving and all forgiving and all accepting and wouldn't put conditions on what I needed to do in order to be accepted into the church. And that's when I really started awakening more broadly into the realm of spirituality. So I realized that my faith now really is love, and my spirituality is much bigger than anything that I had been consciously aware of or raised to believe in. I realized that I can experience spirituality in any moment, wherever I am. It's all around me. The energy's all around me and I'm part of it. And so knowing that I have that connection with all there is has me feel totally supported and loved and held, and completely embraced just as I am for who I am. So life is good.
In recent decades, a shift has occurred in the spiritual landscape of many societies. Scientific worldviews have gained prominence, leading to increased secularization. Demands of modern life have left many with less time for religious observance, and the internet has opened a floodgate of diverse beliefs and critiques of established religion. Younger generations are approaching spirituality differently than their forebears, often finding traditional practices less relevant to their daily experiences. Simultaneously, we're witnessing a surge in interest towards non-traditional spiritual paths and philosophies. People are seeking meaning and connection in new ways outside the confines of organised religion. Considering these sweeping changes, we must ask, are mainstream religious institutions facing an insurmountable challenge in maintaining the congregations? And will the real winners be those who maintain their faith?
People often want to know what's the difference between the spiritual, paranormal realm, the astral realm, the angelic realm, and we can bring in the physical realm in here. In the universe is all energy. That is the bottom line in the universe, it's energy. And the only difference between anything in the universe is vibrational frequency. And this is what the difference between the paranormal and the astral and the angelic realms are. They vibrate on different frequencies. And as I mentioned before, all these dimensions and frequencies are right here, right now. So it's not as if the astral realm or the angelic realm are right out there somewhere. They're not. They're right here. But the key to being able to tap into them is meditation and developing your conscious awareness.
Some people who have near-death experiences find it a blissful state to be in. When they're in another realm or another dimension, they have a strong sense of feeling like they've gone home. So that when they come back to their body, they can be extremely depressed because they're back here on planet Earth. And let's face it, being on Earth is not easy a lot of the time. It's a challenge, it's hard work. We have to earn a living, raise children, send them to school, try and be happy in the middle of all this, find our lives ourselves. There's a lot of challenges to being a physical being on planet Earth. But this is where we are. And no matter how much we want to stay in that other realm, that's not the goal. We can only be there for a short amount of time, at least on a temporary basis. We do have to come back to Earth, and we do have to face the practicalities of life. And really, maybe that's part of the journey, is discovering that we actually have to do that. We have to suck it up, basically, and be human beings fully manifested on the planet, fully incarnated, to have the full, rich experience of being a human being.
The message I want to leave you with is this, that you are a spark of the divine. You are not separate. The divine is not separate to you. You are in the universe, and the universe inside you too. You're breathing it in every single day, and the universe is breathing you too. So if you're willing and wishing and open to connecting in with the divine realm, it's simply a matter of remembering who you truly are.
Well, it's difficult to categorize what the angelic realm actually is. Obviously, in esoteric terms, as I said, it's the Yetziratic realm, or even the Briatic if you have contact with what's known as the archangels. But from my healing experience, and also other experiences that I've had, it's always worth asking for help. Just by asking for help from whatever it is, you can create whatever paradigm it is, whether it's a Mary or whoever, or Jesus or whatever you want. Ask for help for whatever it is. Pray, some people term it as praying, through the medium of meditation, and you will have contact.
You have never been alone. You've never been alone. And I just want you to leave this conversation knowing that you're not alone. You've never been alone. All you need to do is ask for the help that you want, and it is here for you in the non-physical.
For me, the most important thing about the divine realm is that it's just part of reality. It is actually right here, right now. The Celtic tradition, which is one of the traditions that's given me the capacity to describe how all of this works, talks about thin places. And a thin place is where you have a sense that you are just separated by the thinnest of veils from the divine realm or the angelic realm, whatever you want to call it. But that is part of reality, and by being in a thin place, one has a sense of being able to work out who you are, what your vocation is, being connected to the totality of everything, and that sense of discovering that sense of connection sets us free from all of the sort of other stuff that can drive us. So it sets us free from wanting to be better than others. It sets us free from feeling inadequate. It sets us free from all of that other stuff that limits our culture. It sets us free to be our true selves and to thrive.
Real contact with beings from other realms is usually much more mundane than depicted in Hollywood blockbusters. It can happen anywhere: a bus stop, your bedroom, even a gas station. These experiences often occur when someone's energy and vibrational frequency is more elevated, perhaps through a practice like CU5, meditation, prayer, or even after a life-changing event. It's difficult for those who have yet to experience something other to understand, let alone believe in other realms and the beings that inhabit them. To those who are in the know, that had contact, please show compassion.